Okay, everybody, welcome. We're talking about the grit factor. Sidney's about to write on all of these books. Well, he may not get to quite all of them, but there are folks that have bought these books. It's your new book that you just came out with. It's called The Grit Factor. And if you are somebody that bought a book during our earlier session, odds are he's signing it right now for you.
Oh, yes, I'm signing books, and you can go on to SidneyMoncrief.com, buy a book for yourself, buy a book for a friend. It's an excellent tool to increase our awareness and dedication to diversity, equity, and inclusion. We're looking forward to a tremendous 45 minutes, Rush.
Yes, so this is what we're calling a virtual book signing. And so the odds are that somebody like Tommy Overton or Ellen Sullivan or Tanya Sloans, all of whom bought books.
Mac McClarty,
Michael Marvin, Andrew Grozalski, John Barker, Michelle Mann. All of you folks who bought books are getting them signed by Sidney right now. And then we'll tell you a bit about the book. Maybe something you want to get at SidneyMoncrief.com or something that you might want to get for your company, because that's a lot of how it's set up as well, such that companies can purchase it and use it with their employees.
Oh yeah, we have a 200 book order from Freightert in Milwaukee. We have a 20 book order from Baylor White. We have a 20 book order with Milwaukee Fellows with John Daniels. So we're getting some good orders, good interest in the book. Great product.
And so the idea is that it's something that all employees can use, and there's a quote from the book that is one of my favorite ones that Sidney says in the book. He says, "I'm a believer that the starting point must be simple and manageable." And there's been a renewed focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion in recent months. It was growing before, now it has really grown, and companies have seen the need to get their employees on the same page on this subject. This book is designed to be accessible, that an employee who maybe did not have this at the forefront of their thinking before can still benefit from it.
And the start, Rush, is so basic. It's awareness. It's awareness, and it's also getting in tune with who you are. The book is designed to teach individuals how to build relationships and how to be in better concert with themselves, with the 5 components of emotional intelligence. And that is the beginning. Once you start there, you can start building from there. And we think we have a product that's simple, it's easy to read. We use activities, we use a lot of great illustrations for people to see, and we have acronyms galore throughout the book.
And of course, the reason they have acronyms is because it's a mnemonic device. It helps you remember the different things, makes it more accessible. So many of you, if you're watching this, probably know who Sidney is. Naismith Memorial Basketball Hall of Famer, Collegiate Basketball Hall of Famer, NBA All-Star, Defensive Player of the Year, all of these things.
A long-time entrepreneur also. I've been an entrepreneur for years. I think that's really the background behind the book is since I had companies, I sort of understood what it was like to have an environment that is inclusive, that does believe in diversity, and that is equitable. And that's part of the reason why I decided to write the book.
Well, and so talk a little bit about how things that you learned in basketball have helped translate into this business environment.
Well, I would say basketball, I don't know, team sports is always a great equalizer, and that's why as much as possible, parents should have their kids play sports, especially if the sport is with people unlike themselves. You can develop relationships with people that you would not have developed relationships with. And I think just the fact that I played in a great high school program and in college, Coach Eddie Sutton, Coach Oliver Elders, my high school coach, they always emphasize teamwork, and they always emphasize it doesn't really matter how that person looked. You just have to have a good, solid relationship, and you have to understand that they're a very important part of what you're trying to do. And that certainly helped me build a foundation. But I think it came more just from my family than anything else, even before I started playing basketball, or before I was very good in basketball. I had a ton of experiences that were positive with people that didn't look like me, and that influenced how I looked upon people later in life.
So my name is Rush Olson, and I work with a company called Mint Farm Films. I'll post the links to that in the comments. But one of the projects that we're working on is a documentary about Sidney and about his life. And as we were working on this project, one of the themes that came out was that during his time at Arkansas, his teams had an impact on more than just the court. Now, that was what they did in basketball in Arkansas was significant. They put that sport on the map by going to the Final Four. But what they also did was they had a positive influence on a state that was barely 20 years removed from the Central High crisis. And so what was it about your teams that enabled Arkansans of different ethnicities to maybe bond a little bit?
We won.
Winning. You won with.
Yeah, but we won, and we won with people that were from the state. Our top 3 players were from the state of Arkansas. They were African Americans. But I think the bottom line was people wanted to get behind something positive. And the commonality that we all have is the thread that will hold diversity, equity, and inclusion together. And it's no different at Arkansas. We were winning. People wanted to be a part of it. They shared in what we were doing. They felt they were a part of the state, and we made them feel very proud. The same thing can happen, though, in the workplace. In any organizations, you can have that same dynamics with your leadership and also with the people that work within the company.
One of the things Sidney did after basketball was he operated auto dealerships. When you operated auto dealerships, how did you set up your dealerships to make use and have diversity, inclusion, and equity be a positive factor in your operation?
Yeah, before we do that, I need to mention the book one more time. We have a hardcover that's $25 plus shipping and handling, and then we have a paperback, beautiful paperback book that's $15 plus shipping and handling. Go ahead and get your copies, get a copy for your friend. But Rush, I think when I started my dealership, I was so fresh out of the NBA and somewhat college. I had this vision of how a workplace should look. And my vision was it should not be restricted by the color of your skin, your gender, your socioeconomic background. We were very inclusive in who we hired. We were one of the first dealerships in the market to hire people that were offenders coming out and they needed opportunities. We gave them opportunities. We were one of the first dealerships to have African Americans as the head leader of a dealership. We were one of the first dealerships to have a service writer that was a female. We were one of the first dealerships that probably paid their receptionist who was a female as much as they paid the office staff. My driving force was to make sure that diversity, equity, and inclusion lived throughout the dealership. And that was my vision. That's still my vision.
So I'm going to read another quote from the book. And one of the things that I think people maybe who look like me have to think about is, naturally, we all think about what's in it for me. Mm-hmm. And so I'm going to read a quote from the book. When you expand your circle with different types of people, your knowledge of other cultures grows. This growth will make you a more rounded and interesting person. And so, to me, your dealership is probably an example of that the people who weren't necessarily, think of themselves as benefiting from diversity, equity, and inclusion, there's a lot they can get out of it too. I think about dealing with customers of different kinds. If I have a client who is not like me, I may need insight into what that client's needs are.
Yes, and also it allows you to build these great relationships with people that you would not have otherwise built. And now, when you have a situation that you're not used to, like you're saying, you have a reference point for maybe how to deal with a certain environment that's different than what you're accustomed to. And your customer base appreciates that. There's more empathy, there's more appreciation for people are different, and all they expect is great service. All they expect is people to treat them very kind and to treat them nice. And all those were factors moving forward. And this book, again, helps people to understand I must present the best me at all times if I'm going to move this conversation forward.
So if you look at this, GRIT it's actually another acronym. It's G.R.I.T. Let's talk a little bit about what that stands for. Why is it the book named that?
We have a lot of workshops that we do, and we actually have a GRIT factor, a workplace readiness workshop, and we started using the term GRIT a lot more because we felt that it embodied what you want your not only leadership to have, but also people within your organization. You want them to be, we like to say gritty. We want them to be tough. We want them to be people that don't give up. So GRIT, the acronym stands for, G is for growth. We want to make sure that when you're dealing with diversity, equity, inclusion, or any part of your life, you have to grow as a person. You have to have different experiences. You have to accept different ideas. So growth is one thing that we talk about quite a bit in the book. How about being resilient? That's so important because we're having these conversations that are uncomfortable for a lot of people. Matter of fact, one survey that they surveyed a lot of different corporations, and they found that only 38% of the workers wanted to have the conversation about diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's not a conversation that people want to have. So when you start having these tough conversations, when you want to quit or not have them, you have to be resilient, have that resolve to keep the conversation going. And the I is for integrity. So we have growth, we have resiliency, and we have integrity. Integrity is that glue that holds everything together, because if they can't trust you, they can't trust your word, they can't trust you, then you cannot build relationships with people. And the T is for the word tenacity. It's all about the passion that you have for anything that you do, how aggressive, the pace that you move. A lot of times companies, they miss the T. They have committee on top of committee, they study the issue, yet they don't have that drive, that aggressive commitment to make things happen. So grit is growth, resiliency, integrity, and tenacity. Those are the 4 aspects of grit. When you have those, you put them together, you got something pretty special.
So we have a question from Jadarius Willis, and Jadarius asks, have you ever felt excluded in the workplace?
Absolutely. I mean, that's just natural to feel that way. Now, I've been my own employee for most of my life.
Right, you can only blame yourself if it happened this way.
Yeah, the people that worked under me excluded me a lot, intentionally and rightfully so. But I have occasionally worked for other individuals or companies that I have felt exclusion. But what I try to do is, when you feel that way, you have to have a conversation about how you're feeling to someone, and then you have to try to include yourself wherever you can. You can certainly do something about it. What you can't do is isolate and continue to have that feeling. So I try to engage more when I would feel that way.
Jadarius used a good word, which is excluded. And I think one of the things with whenever you're doing this training is trying to get people to relate to what you're talking about, to bring it into their own lives. And if you say, do you want to be excluded? Well, no, of course, nobody wants to be excluded. And so you have to think then, and this comes into what you were talking about with empathy, if I don't want to feel excluded, the odds are the next guy doesn't want to feel excluded either.
Yeah, and then you have to also, Rush, I'm glad you said that, you have to also make yourself inviting. Just think sometimes you're walking, or I'm jogging, I don't jog anymore, but I'm walking in the morning, and you see the person that looks like they have this chip on the shoulder and they're walking, they look really angry about something. It's amazing what happens when you speak. And sometimes they're shocked that you're speaking because you're making yourself more inviting to them. And then they open up a little more. They give a smile, they say, good morning, how are you doing? Then you have a conversation. And I think sometimes we rely so much on the other person on this inclusion scale that we don't put enough emphasis on, okay, what am I doing? Am I being kind? Am I smiling? Am I being nice? Am I being approachable? Those are all factors. And if you, as to if you're going to feel included or not within the workplace or in general.
So that reminds me of a quote I'm going to read from the book, and that leads us into talking about a little bit of the way the book is structured. And one of the things Sidney has done is he has gotten people of different backgrounds to tell stories, and their sort of introduction or experience or whatever it is with diversity, inclusion, and equity. And one of the guys that's in there is Stratton Horace. And Stratton, Sidney knows him well. I know him a little bit. He's on the advisory board of the local chapter of the National Basketball Retired Players Association. And I'm going to read just a little bit from what he wrote. He said, I was shocked when a good friend, the city leader of a nonprofit whose board I sit on that focuses on after-school development for minorities, told me that when our black high school students see you, a white male who's been a successful lawyer with a long career, they see the definition of white privilege. I responded with surprise. Really, I never thought of myself that way. He remarked, they just don't know you. You're not like that, but they don't know any better. But that's the way they see you until they get the opportunity to know who you really are. This conversation was an eye-opener for me. What did you take out of that with regard to what we were just talking about in terms of getting to know people and such?
Yeah, I think the biases and the stereotypes is something we all have. To overcome them, it takes like we're saying, the ability to build a solid relationship. Sometimes the terms that we use can short circuit that process. So we have to always be careful. We have to be true to who we are and what we believe. We have to make sure whatever we give someone, we give it to them in a way that they can accept it. The term white privilege we go into in this particular book is an interesting take that I have on it. I'm not going to tell you what it is. You buy the book and find out.
SidneyMoncrief.com, by the way.
SidneyMoncrief.com. But that term has been used so much that I think it has caused people to become very defensive about the term. We have to be very careful that we explain what it means better. So we're not saying that people didn't earn what they have. We're not saying they don't have talent and skill. But you are saying that by the simple nature of the color of your skin, you get certain rights and privileges that someone of my color skin does not receive or has not received. That's reality. Mm-hmm. But it's not an indictment. It's just the way it is. So we have to take those concepts and turn those into more of a positive conversation. So the question to me is, it's not if you have white privilege. If you're white, you probably do. That's okay. The question is, what are you doing with it? Are you improving the society because of the position that you have? Or are you not? Are you pushing people down further? And those are the things that we want to make people understand. I'm a person of black privilege because I had people of white privilege open doors for me that other African Americans didn't have open for them. The question becomes, okay, you're a person of black privilege. What are you doing with it? What are you doing with that platform? So those are the questions and challenges I want people to start considering.
Well, and you say that, I was about to bring up some names like Eddie Sutton, Sheffield Nelson, probably Don Nelson falls into that category. Mac McClarty.
Yeah, Jerry Jones. A lot of people, Phil Cox, Jay Dickey. I have a lot of people, Coach Ripley. I have a long line of people that have opened doors for me and given me access that I would not otherwise have. And I think that's going to be part of this battle, is every person that has the ability to open access for someone that don't look like them.
I've been doing a lot of research lately into companies and their diversity and inclusion and how they're using it in their marketing. Because the film we're working on, we feel like there's a real content marketing piece that could be very useful for companies. And one of the things I notice sometimes is, as I look at this, there are people that are veterans of companies. They've been there 15 years, 20 years, whatever, and they've gotten promoted up. The giving of the chance, as you say, what a Sheffield Nelson might have done for you or someone like that, is key, because then you get them in the door. And now when it's 15 years later and people have been promoted up through the organization, that's a more diverse cohort.
It really is. And then you set a tone for the younger generation coming along, that you can mentor more people, and then you can, on that higher level throughout the organization, you can start having these people with the capacity to lead and to change the world. And that's essential if we're going to continue to win this battle. Do we have any other questions? That's good. Are we over there?
So first of all, Alyssa Radler says, just bought my copy. Thanks for talking to me yesterday, Sidney. Have you signed one for Alyssa yet?
I have signed one for Alyssa.
All right, so Alyssa, we got that signed for you. Good for you. Jadarius Willis says, do you think your neighborhood is more diverse than it was 20 years ago? And by the way, anybody that wants to comment on that in the comments, just hit reply, and we'd love to see your impressions as well. But do you think your neighborhood is more diverse than it was 20 years ago?
Oh, that's my question.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Well, the neighborhood that I live in Little Rock, Arkansas, yes, absolutely. It's more diverse than 20 years ago. I remember when I grew up there 60 years ago, right? There was 42nd Street, and on one side in South were all white families. And then this little section to the north, they were all African American or black families. And we would stand, I said this in the book, we would stand on the corner with the browns or the whites, that was the last name, and we would just have all these crazy racial insults, just yelling. I was only 5 to 6 years old. Think about that. Where did you learn that kind of language at 5 and 6 years old? But now, the neighborhood that we live in Little Rock is very Hispanic, it's white, African American, it's very, very diverse. Where I live in Dallas, absolutely. When I first moved to this complex, it was mostly white, and now we have Africans, we have people from Middle Eastern, we have Asians, we have African Americans. It's a very, very diverse community, and it makes for a better community.
I live in an apartment complex in North Arlington, right by the ballparks, and it's a diverse space. And I think maybe sometimes apartments lend themselves to that.
It really does. And I think, and you can sometimes sense how uncomfortable some of the residents feel with that. From the first time I moved to this complex to today, you could feel the tension when they see someone of color. Like, why are you living here? Or you just felt the tension. And now it doesn't seem as much because now it's more diversity.
Yeah, I will say, since the events of recent months, one thing I've tried to be very cognizant of, I'd like to think I'm a reasonably friendly guy anyway, but I've been really cognizant of smiling at people.
That's powerful.
From social distance, but of just making sure that if I'm encountering someone, not necessarily of a different ethnicity, but just in general, you want that first impression to be not one of hostility.
A good impression, because we like to say, smile, be kind, be humble, and it will open up opportunities to build relationships. That's the first step.
A person you mentioned that just a couple of minutes ago that I want to make sure we talk about was Charles Ripley, and he's one of 3 people that you dedicated this book to. Tell us who those 3 people are.
Well, my mom, Bernice Perkins, she was the person responsible for setting some of the principles that I have now as how you relate to people. Denise Shaw, a very good friend of the family, she was one that supported a number of organizations that impacted people that didn't look like her and people that maybe didn't have the resources she had. And they're still impacting people, Henry, Anthony, and Sarah, with the new initiative called We Are One initiative that we're going to kick off in Wisconsin and also Arkansas. And then Coach Charles Ripley, who was my junior high, I guess my high school coach somewhat on the 10th grade team. I guess you had a coach of 10th grade team. And he later went to coach at Parkview High School and became my competitor. But he exposed me to so many different experiences that I would not have had had he not taken the time. He had the white privilege, and he took it and he used it to improve the lives of young people. And that's what is very important for people to do.
We have a question from Leslie Orr. Her question is, how important is emotional intelligence in the workplace and in everyday life?
Hey, Leslie, it's essential. Matter of fact, all of our workshops are built on the premise of emotional intelligence, the five components of emotional intelligence, which would be self-awareness, self-motivation, self-regulation. We have discipline that's in that category. We have self-awareness, that's the self-awareness. We have self-awareness, and we have the social skills that's also in that conversation. And the definition of emotional intelligence is your ability to understand and to recognize and to manage your emotions and relationships. So think of how important that is. If you can't manage your relationships and emotions, and actually you have to regulate your emotions to regulate your relationships, then it's going to be very difficult for you to make any progress within the workplace. And certainly it won't happen with diversity, equity, and inclusion. So we make emotional intelligence the foundation of what we talk about in this book.
So we are talking about this book, The Grit Factor, written by Sidney Moncrief, the gentleman to my left. And specifically, the full title is The Grit Factor in Embracing Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And I was doing a test video the other night on my Facebook page, and a friend of mine commented that he had just gotten done with a series of diversity, equity, and inclusion trainings at his workplace. And he said, I wish we'd have had a book like this. And I get the impression that sometimes companies do struggle with they feel like it's important, they feel like they want to educate their employees or help their employees, but sometimes they don't know how to go about it. What are some of the things you tell people to keep in mind?
It's really delicate. It's very delicate, and I try to read quite a few studies on why diversity and inclusion initiatives work and why they don't work. The reasons why they don't work is pretty long, but one thing you have to do is certainly have the commitment of the leadership. That's very important. But you also have to have the buy-in of the staff, and they have to want to do it. You can't force people. You can't force people to do the training. That's the bottom line. You have to make it available for them to do the training, and hopefully they'll want to do it. But once they decide that this is something they're going to do, their change will be pretty phenomenal. But if you force them to do the training, then you get the resentment and you don't get the results that you really need. And I really think it needs to be engagement-based. I know with COVID-19, it's more difficult. I know I guess we have our 4 feet. We're going to pretend like we have 4 feet or 6 feet. But I know with
Our math
COVID-19,
isn't that great.
with COVID-19, there's so much emphasis on virtual training, and that's well and good. However, for this battle, it's all about building relationships. And it's a social battle. It's socialization. You can't get socialization right here. You have to get it face to face. And that's one thing that we pride ourselves on, is making sure that people are building relationships and engaging in person. And I think that makes a tremendous difference in how they take the training.
Sure, and the way it's presented matters as well. And that's one thing Sidney tried to do with this book, was to, first of all, there's variety to it. We mentioned the stories that are in there. There are also illustrations, and an artist named Keith Peterson did the illustrations for this book. We've got Sidney presented as a basketball in some places, which you'll get a kick out of. But Keith is not new to your life. And
no, Keith is not. Keith was a ninth grader when we started school together doing integration of busing in Little Rock. So he went from being that ninth grade kid. I asked Keith, I said, Keith, when you were in the ninth grade, did you have any racial incidents happen to you? He said, yes, I did. He said, I was just walking down the hall one day, and this black guy took 2 of his books and just slapped me in the back of my head. But we had a lot of those type of incidents during the ninth grade. We had kids that were beaten up constantly, lunch money taken constantly. Ninth grade. Fast forward to the 11th, 12th grade. Didn't have any of that. Not because they had gotten older, but because they had started to understand one another and build relationships. And Keith is one of those young men that now, 45 years later, we still are friends, and he's part of this book project because of what we started at Booker Junior High School. Now, I was not the one that slapped him in the back of the head. It was someone else.
we don't have any documentation of that, of course,
No,
but we're going to have to take Sidney's word for it. Well, one of the things I've certainly noticed with you, and when I've been around you and your former Arkansas teammates, and including Jim Counts, who is white, and your African American teammates. Mm-hmm. Clearly, there was a big bond developed there where, one of my takeaways is, wow, these guys still think very highly of each other up and down, 40 years later.
Yeah, it's all about engagement and just learning to trust one another. I think commonality, and that's why getting people together, they need to understand we have more in common than what we have that's different. And the us versus them mentality, let's make it more of a we. And as I started looking at why we hate, there's a special that came on, I think it was 6 different lessons. It was just phenomenal when they started talking about the tribal mentality and how we protect what's ours. And it doesn't matter, the color of skin comes into play, but not as much as we think. It's basically people protecting what's theirs in their minds, and the fear of losing something drives individuals to hate or to despise a different group of people. And that's one thing we have to find a way to break down. And the way you do it, though, is to, again, find ways to build relationships and get things that you have in common, talk about them, and feel good about who you are and who they are.
Which is a great transition to another question here from Ray Boone. First of all, he says, "What up, big cuz?"
Okay.
Which I believe is
What's
referring
up?
to you, because I don't have any cousins named Ray.
You sure? You don't know that. You could have a Ray cousin somewhere.
That's true. I might not. My family's pretty spread out all over the country, so there may be new cousins that I'm not aware of yet. But the most recent cousins I have are female. So anyway, his question is, how can diversity be better established in workplaces?
Like I say, engagement. You have to increase, and I have a model because we're doing some workshops for Pace Industries, Tyson's, hopefully the Dallas Cowboys. So I have a model of how you can increase it within the workplace. And one thing that's very clear is you have to increase the engagement between sometimes the frontline workers and people that are managers, because there's discomfort there. And there's discomfort because people are unfamiliar with other different groups of people. And if you can start increasing that, you'll start seeing the trust increase, and before you know it, the diversity and inclusion issue will slowly get better.
I think one thing that when you have a diverse group of people who do have a goal and they're trying to accomplish something, whether it's winning basketball games or being in a company, I think it provides opportunities for establishing relationships. And so I'm going to read some more quotes from your
Okay.
book. The value of friendship is truly priceless. Friends who will embrace DE&I are the best friends to have. The workplace is the best place to live out the principles of friendship. And the book has a whole section about friendship. Why was that important to put in?
Well, because a lot of times we take friendship for granted. We don't understand friendship. We don't understand the nature and how important it is to develop that trust bond with someone and to be their accountability partner, to be their cheerleader. And that's why I place a lot of emphasis on friends and developing friends, because I know this battle, and it is a battle, will only be won if we start one by one developing those friendship and relationships. And then now you become my ally. I become your ally. And now we start spreading this message together and becomes very powerful, as opposed to being isolated trying to carry on this battle, which, as we know, won't work at all.
One of my favorite stories from the world of sports involves Jackie Robinson. And there was a gentleman who was a catcher on the first Dodgers team that he played on. And his name was Bobby Bregen. And I know about him because he's a longtime Fort Worth man. He's since passed away. But Bobby Bregen was raised in the Old South. And at first, he wanted no part of an African-American player on his team and let management know that in no uncertain terms. And what ended up happening was Jackie Robinson came to the team. Clearly, he saw the contribution he could make in the field. Bobby Bregen learned what kind of man he was as well, and he figured out that that was a good thing. Mm. And they became friends and remained friends until Jackie Robinson died. And that, to me, is one of the best lessons of what you're talking about, about the progress that can make and how vital diversity is in that.
Yeah, and then they set a good example for others to follow. Mm-hmm. That's the power of when you have these sports or any organization. Sometimes I remember saying, I can't believe this person's friends with this person, because they were totally opposite, nothing in common. And they become friends. And it makes you realize that, hey, if they can do that, I have the opportunity to step outside my comfort zone and establish relationships with other people. But you can only do it, though, if you have to get yourself together. These emotional intelligence points are very, very valid, and you have to make sure you're really on top of your game in that area.
Read something else from the book. So one of the stories that we were just talking about cousins, and Sidney's cousin Stacy Fuji contributed a story.
Yes, she did, Stacy.
And Stacy has done a lot of things at a very high level. And so I am going to read something that she said about people she worked with. She said, many of our clients felt the need to constantly remind me of my race and gender. In an attempt to bond, they would tell me how I reminded them of a girlfriend they had in college, or how they had the nicest black woman to work for their family growing up. I was never sure what that had to do with the professional advice I was offering them. I'm grateful for that opportunity because it made me far more aware of my own perceptions and behavior. I genuinely try to be aware of my biases and presumptions so that I do not hinder someone's opportunity or growth based on my limited exposure and understanding. Based on that story, what should someone who is trying to set the tone for a culture in the workplace take out of it?
I tell you, we made it so tough nowadays because everything you say is wrong, everything you do is wrong, and a lot of people are very hesitant about what to say, what to do, how to engage, how to become a friend with someone, because what if I say Negro instead of black? What if I say African American instead of, you got all these different things that you can say that could just turn people the wrong way. I would say you have to cautiously, slowly, like she's saying, get to know the person individually. And we're talking right now about groupthink, and that's been the big issue is we, as a society in general, we put everybody in these groups, and we have these biases and stereotypes based on these groups. And we have to somehow start looking at people as individuals and slowly get to know them and be very careful. You might want to ask what's appropriate. That's what I do. What do you think is appropriate that I call you, what I say? What's appropriate? That's a good question. Don't feel shy about doing that, because you certainly don't want to say something that could circumvent you having a good relationship with someone.
And that's one of the things I liked about this book. We're talking about the grit factor, available on SidneyMoncrief.com. I felt like it was going to be valuable for someone no matter where they are in their level of understanding of that.
Yeah, it was written that way because, as you know, I'm all over the map with my thought process. I'm a very creative person, so when I start writing, I try to write in ways to impact people. I'm not writing for me. I'm writing, okay, what would make someone consider changing their mindset and changing their behavior And I only knew that the only way you could do that is give them a lot of different things to consider, not just one way to deliver material. Give them an illustration, give them a practice at the very end, give them acronyms, give them everything they need to change behavior and move forward.
It's one of the things I took out of this book is that no matter who you are, whether you look like me, whether you look like Sidney, whatever, you're going to read the book and feel like, okay, I can come out of this being a decent person.
A decent person. I always like to say, I want to be the best Sidney. I want you to see the best me. And this book is all about presenting yourself in a good light and making sure that you have your emotional intelligence intact so you can manage, understand relationships, and also your emotions.
And that's not to say there are not tough stories in this book too. I mean, that example that Stacy gave, you know, nowadays I think we kind of cringe at that a little bit. You've got some of those in there, but none of the tone is, let's say, antagonistic. You've got a great quote about not starting arguments.
Oh, yes. I said, work harder at finding solutions than you do trying to win an argument.
Yeah.
And that would be a great thing that if we all just did that on a consistent basis and just think with this. It's not any doubt that if you ask a person, do you want to be included? Do you want to be treated fairly? Do you want people to accept your differences? Most reasonable people will say yes, yes, yes. So this concept and this push that we have for diversity and inclusion is not something that people should feel is not needed, because we all would want that, and all we're saying is everyone should have that. And the only way to do it is to get your grit on, as we say, get your grit on and make it happen.
All right, so one thing you need to make happen is you need to sign some more books. This is a virtual book signing.
All right.
And we've had some people like Joseph Luna and Kevin Owens and Tanya Davis and Jessica Florer, Randall Hutchins, Suzanne Reichert, David Bowen, Carter Keith, all purchasing books. We've also had a message on here from somebody really important that said, "Thanks for listening in, friends. So proud of my husband, the author and activist." That's from Keisha Moncrief, Sidney's wife, who's in the behind the scenes over here, has been helping us out on this a lot. So thank you to her, and certainly we appreciate it.
And we had two young men and someone, Juliet, we had two young men from Hillcrest Academy that came to help us. We appreciate you guys. Why don't you give them a shout out, their names?
Jacoby and Jadarius, thank you. You guys have also been very helpful. And Julia came all the way from Milwaukee.
Milwaukee to help us out, yes. And the young men are basketball players. They challenged me to a game of one-on-one.
Yes.
They sure did. I just told them they're not ready for that. This is a different level. They're not ready for it.
Yeah, guys, you guys are going to go in and you're going to be all innocent. You think you're going to have a nice game of one-on-one, and then he's going to start pulling out all these dirty tricks he learned from Don Nelson back in the day,
Right.
And you guys are going to be like, why did we sign up for this?
And the biggest trip I'm going to pull is getting in my wheelchair to play, because I cannot play basketball anymore, but thank you guys.
All right, well, thank you for joining us for this session. It's always enjoyable to talk about these topics with Sidney, because he's so knowledgeable, and if you ever have a chance to take one of his workshops, whether specifically about diversity, inclusion, and equity, or about any workplace readiness topic, you should absolutely take advantage of it. This book is available at SidneyMoncrief.com.
SidneyMoncrief.com. Get your copy, get it signed. Thank you all.
All right, thank you very much for joining us.